President, we're now in day 19 of the Trump shutdown. 19 days that the federal government of the oldest democracy and the world's only superpower has been functioning on only half of its cylinders and making us look ridiculous to the rest of the world. I've spoken multiple times about the devastating impact this reckless and unnecessary shutdown is having on the federal workforce at domestic departments and agencies. Departments like Homeland Security and Agriculture, Transportation, Justice, Interior, and Commerce, agencies like Customs and Border Patrol, the Drug Enforcement Agency, and of course the National Park Service. These departments and agencies have furloughed and stopped paying hundreds of thousands of employees who, as a result, are idle, no longer able to do the job that millions and millions of American taxpayers depend on. Hundreds of thousands more are working without pay until the shutdown ends. The president, who's a billionaire, who's never had to worry about being able to pay the rent or the groceries, says he can relate. Well, if he actually believes he can relate to what they're going through, he's probably the only person in the world that believes that. Programs are on hold. Contracts are being canceled. Incidentally, when these contracts are being canceled, the federal government is liable for penalties. Because government shutdowns don't save money. They cost billions of dollars and they have lasting consequences. And who pays for the shutdown, the billions of dollars? The American taxpayers. And it's a disgrace. It's made even more so by the fact that it's entirely avoidable were it not for the intransigence, indifference, and obsession of one person, President Donald Trump. Incidentally, that's an obsession not with border security. We're all for that. Everybody, Republicans and Democrats, are for border security. And there's already $1 billion in prior appropriation for border security. We're just waiting to be spent. In fact, we offered another $1.3 billion for fiscal year 2019. Of course, the White House says nothing about that. No, the president's myopic obsession, repeated on national television last night, is with building a 30-foot-high wall, mostly on desolate lands that the government's going to have to seize from private owners along our southern border. The price tag to U.S. taxpayers would be at least $18 billion, likely more. A price tag that campaign rally after campaign rally, he promised the American people that Mexico would pay. Gave his word Mexico would pay. Well, of course, we know Mexico won't pay. But there are multiple reasons why it's a terrible idea. Why it won't stop illegal migration. Why it won't stop illicit drugs. And why it'd be a colossal waste of taxpayer dollars. I've discussed that before, and I will again. But I want to talk about the impact the Trump shutdown is having not on the federal government's domestic programs and workforce, but its impact on U.S. national security and global leadership. It's worth asking, what made the United States the world superpower and a global leader in the first place? One reason, of course, is our superior armed forces. That's, I suspect, the only answer President Trump would give, but it'd be only partly correct. Even more important are the ideals enshrined in our Constitution and our Bill of Rights, our democratic institutions, our co-equal branches of government, our diverse citizenry, our regional and global alliances and partnerships. And without these, our men and women in uniform would have precious little to defend. Today, the global supremacy and influence of the United States are being challenged like no time since the Cold War with the former Soviet Union. Why? Well, Let's not look any further than 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. Since his first days in office, President Trump has disparaged long-standing friends and allies. He's withdrawn from international agreements negotiated by past Republican and Democratic administrations. He's announced plans to withdraw from the key nuclear non-proliferation treaty. He's proposed drastic cuts to the operations and programs of the State Department and the U.S. Agency for International Development, which implement our foreign policy. And then on top of all that, the State Department, like other federal departments and agencies, is swept up in the Trump shutdown. So our choices are obvious. We can engage with the world. We can affirm our commitment to our ideals. Engage by continuing to strengthen our democratic institutions, by empowering our diplomats, by expanding our global alliances and partnerships. Or we can withdraw, even to the point of shutting down the federal government. We can cede the global stage to others whose interests are often adverse to our own. We can become the captives of simplistic campaign slogans, xenophobic anti-migrant hysteria, and a manufactured national security emergency. The president said the country needed a good shutdown. He said that, a good shutdown. Well, there's no such thing, not in the greatest country on earth. And he said he'd be proud to take the mantle of blame for shutting down the government. Within the very next day, when he realized he was being blamed for it, he blamed Democrats. He rejected out of hand our proposal to pass the 6 appropriations bills that already received overwhelming bipartisan support in the Republican-controlled Senate. Republican-controlled Senate, which had seen these bills passed with Democrats and Republicans voting for it. Now, most of those bills have nothing to do with border security, but the president is obstinately holding hostage thousands of federal programs funded in those bills, including the paychecks for the people who implement them, and that harms all Americans. With a stroke of a pen, the president could reopen the government. He could continue negotiations on border security. But he refuses. Instead, flippantly, he said, well, the shutdown could last months or even years. In the greatest nation on earth, he would diminish our nation every single day. And what has this reckless abuse of executive power meant for our standing in the world? What has it meant for our diplomats at the State Department and our embassies overseas, whose job it is to protect our global interests, to maintain our alliances and partnerships, to assist the millions of Americans working, studying, and serving overseas, to protect our security? As of yesterday, 34%, more than 1/3 of U.S. direct hire State Department employees in Washington and at our embassies around the world have been furloughed. That's nearly 10,000 employees at the State Department alone are unable to do their job. Others are working without pay. What does that mean when our businesses want to seek help from one of our embassies abroad? What does it mean when a citizen with a problem, a U.S. citizen with a problem abroad, seeks help? There's nobody there. If the shutdown continues, more paychecks will be withheld. The number of furloughed employees will increase. And there'll be a parallel shutting down of diplomacy, of programs, of contracts, and of our ability to engage with both allies and adversaries. The effects are far-reaching. The Bureau of Diplomatic Security will run short of funds, forcing the State Department to deplete resources used to keep other programs operating in order to protect our diplomats and facilities overseas, or eventually relying on unpaid contractors to protect U.S. interests. Roughly 85% of the employees of the State Department's Office of Inspector General have already been furloughed. So if you want to look into any questions of waste, fraud, and abuse, well, that's virtually ground to a halt. Vietnam, a country of nearly 100 million people bordering China, is becoming a key security partner in the Pacific region. But thanks to the Trump shutdown, key employees at our embassy and USAID mission in Hanoi were furloughed. Now, I'm told the lights are still on and the American flag is flying, but that's about it. This is happening in every region of the world. The most powerful nation on earth is there with the lights on and nobody working. This makes us a laughingstock of much of the world. For example, the State Department and the U.S. embassies regularly use their social media accounts to update Americans overseas of important developments that might potentially affect their safety. That was the case during the recent tsunami in Indonesia. What happens the next natural disaster? How does the State Department respond when Americans abroad rely on the social media accounts, but they've fallen silent? And what about the loss of U.S. influence on the world stage? With most official travel suspended, how do we ensure that our priorities are protected in the next trade or arms control or international health summit? Certainly, a lot of other countries might be happy to see the United States not there because suddenly they are the influential ones, not our country. What do you suppose the leaders of China, Russia, Iran, Syria, and North Korea, not to mention allies like Great Britain, Canada, and Japan, think about this? I could almost see President Putin or President Xi Jinping or Ayatollah Khamenei celebrating. What could be better than U.S. embassies operating on life support and U.S. diplomats sidelined while the U.S. government is shut down over building a wall across our southwest desert? Just think about that. We're shut down. We can't engage in critical diplomacy around the world. Why? Well, we're kind of distracted by building a wall somewhere in the desert. Can you imagine how that makes us look to the rest of the world? In fact, does President Trump think the rest of the world's going to sit idly by waiting until the U.S. government reopens? The opposite's going to happen. They're going to take advantage in ways that will not be short-lived. Well, massive humanitarian crises imperil the lives of millions of people in Yemen, Syria, Burma, Venezuela, Central America. The White House is embracing a diminishing role for the United States. Well, Russia meddles in our elections and expands its influence in the Middle East. Well, China buys the allegiance of countries in Africa, Asia, and our own hemisphere by investing billions in ports, energy, and transportation projects. Our State Department is shutting down programs and sending our people home. And it's not just the State Department, USAID, the Peace Corps, the Millennium Challenge Corporation, the Overseas Private Investment Corporation. They're all furloughing personnel. They're canceling new activities. We're saying to countries that we should be competing with, okay, we give up, you take over, you be the great country. What is happening? And with the exception of the U.S. military, this drags on, the United States will be a superpower in name only. Exaggeration? Well, don't bet on it. While our diplomats are furloughed, rather than use the fund Congress already provided for border security, funds that we have provided for border security that the administration hasn't even spent. The president has threatened to ignore the legislative process, to declare a national emergency when none exists, and then order the Pentagon to pay for the wall that he gave his word and swore that Mexico would pay for. Well, not only did he break his word on that, of course, but it's such a flagrant, unwarranted misuse of authority and circumvents the democratic process. Of course there's going to be challenge in the Congress. Of course there's going to be challenge in the courts. But regardless of what happens, what does that say to the rest of the world about our commitment to democracy? How would he be perceived outside this country, particularly by autocrats in Syria, in Saudi Arabia, the Philippines, Brazil, Egypt, Russia, Hungary, Poland, or China? Well, the actions of the leader, and fast becoming the leader of the former chief democracy in this world, it'd be welcomed as a green light by others for declaring a state of emergency and wielding unchecked executive power without regard for the legislature or judiciary as a pretext to do virtually anything, as we've seen some of these countries do in shutting down the independent press, arresting judges, arresting opposition political leaders, using the army to police the streets, closing the borders, all in the name of a manufactured national emergency. And they're going to look at the United States doing this. And this is already happening. Look at Guatemala. They pretend to be a democracy, but their president, President Morales, is openly defying rulings by the Constitutional Court magistrates who are courageously defending the institutions of justice. They're under assault, and the police are ignoring orders of their attorney general. In Egypt, President al-Sisi has locked up tens of thousands of political opponents and other dissidents. In Turkey, President Erdogan has done the same. And who do they get praise from? Who praises them when they do this? President Trump praises them. In Brazil, President Bolsonaro, former military officer, has vowed to open up the Amazon to mining, logging, and agribusiness, notwithstanding the damage that'll do to the rest of the world. He wants to give the police a free hand to use deadly, lethal force with impunity. He's gearing up to crack down on civil liberties. And where does his applause come from? The White House. No one disputes that the United States has experienced national emergencies. We face a potentially existential threat. Look at Pearl Harbor. Look at 9/11 attacks. Even the Cuban Missile Crisis could have been. Or a future deadly disease pandemic that infects thousands of Americans, rapidly spreads out of control. That might qualify as an emergency. But the president talks as though the sky is falling in Texas, but any rational person recognizes that the situation on our southwest border is not remotely a national emergency. To call Central American families fleeing poverty and violence a threat to the security of the world's wealthiest, most powerful country, it's wrong, it's an embarrassment. Especially when the Border Patrol's own data shows the number of migrants apprehended at the southern border has plummeted over the past 10 years. And the White House, grasping for arguments to justify the president's broken campaign promise that Mexico would pay for his wall, has played fast and loose with the facts in a desperate attempt to incite fear among the American people, and I guess to distract the American people from the fact that the president broke his word. The president and those vice president and others have shamelessly trumpeted all kinds of wildly inaccurate and grossly misleading statistics about migrants, terrorists, asylum applicants, unaccompanied children, and illegal drugs, and these so-called facts are contradicted by their own agencies in our government. The White House says thousands of migrant terrorists have been apprehended, falsely suggesting they were stopped at the Mexican border. Almost none of them were. We face a far more serious threat from al-Qaeda and ISIS using social media to inspire extremists already in the U.S. or Canada to commit terrorist acts. The last thing anyone would do who is genuinely concerned about terrorism is to shut down our government and withhold funding from the very agencies whose job it is to track down and arrest those people. You can't say we fear terrorists, but we're going to cut out the money and close down the agencies that are supposed to go after them. You know, the real threat to our national security is shutting down the government, furloughing 10,000 State Department employees, telling our embassies to cancel programs, telling our diplomats to stay home. Now, while we come to grips with practical ways of strengthening our borders, so we can more humanely and efficiently process migrants who request asylum, which we have to do, we ought to stay focused on the real threats to our national security. We need our embassies at full strength. We need our diplomats in the room with their European, Russian, Chinese, South Korean, Central American, Middle Eastern, and African counterparts. We need to strengthen NATO and our other alliances so we can rely on our allies and partners to support us in responding to real national emergencies around the world. We need to expand our cybersecurity, non-proliferation, international broadcasting, other public diplomacy, internet freedom programs, military education training, maritime security, law enforcement, other international assistance programs. Instead, because of the president's obsession with this wall across the desert, these and other State Department programs are stuck in neutral. The people who implement them are at home, and our security is diminished. We need to act like a superpower at the United Nations and NATO and many other regional organizations where decisions are made that directly affect our interests and our security. But none of this is possible during a government shutdown. A shutdown that with each passing day erodes our democracy, it weakens our global leadership, it threatens our security. And we all know this. Republicans and Democrats alike in this body know this. The American people know this. The world knows this. The president needs to reopen the government, start acting like the defender of the Constitution and of our national security, the defender the country needs. So how do we take care of this? Well, I would, again, urge the Republican leader, let the Senate vote on the bipartisan 6-bill minibus, and when it passes, he and the entire Republican caucus should urge the president to sign it, because it would pass. The Republican leader brought up this bill to open the government, it would pass. It is something that Senator Shelby and I have worked so hard on, and we've got almost unanimous agreement of Republicans and Democrats for it. It would pass. All they have to do is have the Republican leader bring it up. Because remember, that is our job. We're an independent, co-equal branch of government. We're supposed to vote and appropriate the funds so the federal government can work for all the American people. It is not our job as senators to sit on the sidelines while the wheels of government grind to a halt because the president is recklessly holding it hostage. Let's do our job. Let the Senate be the conscience of the nation. Let us pass these bills. They would pass easily. Let's urge the president to sign them if they do. Then get our government back and open. Stop looking like a petulant child to the rest of the world. Let us be the superpower we can be. Mr. President, I suggest the absence of a quorum.